All right. So welcome to CX Exchange Success Hour. We are discussing today, basically we have three hiring managers who will be comparing the hows and whys of hiring processes and interviewing. And I know this is really important to me. There's been so many times when I've been at startups and I've had whole range of support or zero support as I've had to do hiring. And I think it's really helpful as hiring managers to think about what we're trying to do and how we might improve these processes. And so I know that Effie Manstorf, Anika Trivedi, and Anika Zubair have really not only continually looked at their own hiring processes and changed them over time, but that they'll have a lot to contribute in terms of thoughts about this. And this is something I think is important for both the hiring managers and also people on the other side who are interviewing, getting a sense of like, why are we doing this? What is the purpose after all? So I'm just going to basically go in order that I see you on my Zoom screen, if that's okay. Effie, why don't you first do your introduction so everyone can get an idea of who you are and why I love you so much.
Oh, you could talk to that part. But my name is Effie Manstorf. I'm the VP of Customer Success at a company called Adaptive Shield. We're a cybersecurity company. I've been in leadership positions for the past 15 or so years in customer facing for a few decades. I could say that. I've earned it. And my specialty, if you will, is helping startups create customer success teams from scratch, which means that I do a lot of hiring and evaluating and creating processes. So I'm very excited to share some of those tips with you today.
Yeah, you've been through it a few times. Anika Trivedi has also got an interesting story and another person I dearly love here.
Thanks, Jan. Hi, everyone. As Jan mentioned, I oversee the global client experience team for JLL Technologies, which is a corporate real estate company. I've worked in startups, less than 100 people, and now my team right now is over 150 people. So I've done hiring on both sides. And so the experience that I bring is really varied, I think, but I really do enjoy it. And I'm based in Boston, but I do oversee a global team across a wide variety of folks.
Nice. And someone who I have been mispronouncing her name for years, and she's so gracious and lovely. She doesn't correct me, but hopefully now I'm saying it correctly. Anika Zubair.
Yay, Jan. It only took us a few years, but I don't mind how you call me, whatever way you want to say it. It's all good, all the love. Thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone. I love coming back to these success hours. Some of you might know me from my voice. That's what I've been told, at least. A lot of people listen to the podcast, but I am here as head of customer success at Griffin. I have built hiring processes at a number of companies now. Griffin is actually my sixth startup in the world of startups, which is honestly wild, the wild, wild ride of startups. I have been part of from day zero to like hundreds of CSMs globally. So definitely seen the transformation of building a hiring process when you don't have a hiring team in place into, a more mature organization. But as Monica said, I definitely fall on the earlier side when it comes to just building what a hiring process should look like, what a hiring manager should look for. And yeah, that is me. Oh, and I'm in London. I know my accent there. I'm Californian, but I'm based in London. So my accent always throws everyone off, but I'm in the UK.
Awesome. All right. So let's dig in. I'll share my screen here. And we have basically all of the information on one slide. I know that's kind of a no-no, but we have so many resources. I'm just putting it all out here. So when you think about the whys and hows of the hiring and interview process, and, as a hiring manager, so often what you're trying to think about is that mutual match. And the mutual aspect of it is so critical, because I think we've all experienced, when you think you get the right person in and then they don't feel it, or it just isn't working or something like that. And you have someone who like basically leaves after a week or 2 months or something like that. And with everything it takes to do a hire from the internal side, and I know that people who are searching feel like, well, you kidding? What all it takes on your side? But seriously, there's a lot involved in doing a hire when you're in that hiring manager role, right? So thinking about making certain that it's mutual for the company size, the culture, what stage your company is, and really thinking through like the knowledge, the skill, what sort of acumen, what level of skill folks need, right? So why don't we dig in? I know that you each have some thoughts on this. Monica, you're not on mute, so I'm assuming you've got a thought here.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so as I mentioned in my intro, my background is varied. So I've worked for a startup and I've worked for large companies doing hiring, and there's definitely a difference, and I've adapted my process because of that difference, and a lot of lessons learned. But I think the biggest one, regardless if you're in a smaller company or large, is the pre-work as a hiring manager. Making sure your job description is very clear, especially now that the hiring managers are not really doing the first pass, especially where I am today. It could be a human review with the recruiter or even AI. And so really making our job description very clear, very specific, and making sure that we know what we're looking for. And the interviewers also know. We do a bit of a panel. So one of my lessons learned was when we were in a smaller company, it was the hiring manager doing the process, looking at the resumes, doing that first interview, and then it would sort of go to the VP for a final kind of cultural fit. When we moved into a larger organization, we just found that that didn't work, and we really needed that peer interview and an exercise in place. And so that's what we sort of put in place today, and that's what we have. And we found that the peer interview is really great for matching fit and talking about the good, bad, and the ugly, and being as transparent as possible. So I just wanted to kind of chime in on those two topics. The pre-work and the peer review is really two of the things that we've put in place that have been game changers for us.
Yeah. And so what are some of the other things? I mean, we talked about so much when we were preparing for this. Effie, I know that you were also talking about pipeline.
Yeah. So pipeline is really important in terms of hiring, just like you need a pipeline for sales and for other, revenue related items. The same for interviewing. There's been many situations where you think you got the right person, but for whatever reason, either references don't come through what you expect, or they have been interviewing in another company and don't accept your position. You go through so much in order to get to the end. You want to make sure you have plenty of backups and you keep that line going as you're moving along. So pipeline is definitely super, super important. Another thing is the exercises. I tend to look at interviewing in two ways. One is the theory and the other is the practice. So the intro interview that we do is more of theory, open questions of talk to me about a time that you're really proud of as a CSM. Talk to me about a time where something you did influence the customer for good. Talk to me about a time that you dealt with a very challenging situation. And then we supplement that with a practice, which is access to our tool to see how they would actually do in our company with some key questions, looking at our tool and some, dummy data and how, what would you do first? How would you tackle this situation? What do you see here? So those two things together, I think, also make for a much better quality candidate at the end.
And Anika, you also have a exercise, but it's something that everyone in your company does. Do you want to share something about that?
Yeah, I've built previous hiring processes where there's been some sort of exercise or task. Usually it's to understand if the candidate really understands our like ways of working rather than really like technical acumen or anything like that. It's again, if you're a good presenter, if you're going to be in a CSM role, but at Griffin, there's something that's built into our culture, and it's because we're a fully remote company that in our like entire culture, we believe in really strong writing skills. And it's called like we have an entire blog page about this. Like our CEO's written it. It's called How We Write. And every single person that's interviewed at our organization actually has a writing task to do. So it's even a CSM, it's not a presentation, but we might actually write like, hey, customer has come with X problem. Please, can you write a 1 page or like 1 paragraph email to deal with X? And we're not looking again. There is some content, like some evaluation of like if you're just making up stuff, but it's mostly about making sure that you're using the right writing acumen because we are remote first. And one of our cultural values is being able to articulate yourself in a written manner and very like strongly, and making sure you're able to articulate yourself because sometimes you're not in a meeting or in an office. And everyone in our company, including people who we've interviewed for our COO role, our CFO role, or our chief people officer, all of them have had to do a writing task. So the task for us isn't necessarily testing your skill set per se. It's really testing if you're going to be a great fit part of our wider organization. Obviously, it will be related to the role. So if you're a technical support engineer, it'll be a little bit more technical of a question, but for us, the task is not meant to be like go away for 5 days and put this big presentation together. We don't want you to spend that kind of time. We want you to just do something that you would do normally, which is write an email or maybe write a help doc or something like that. So for us, it's really about writing because we believe in our culture and we really want to find a cultural fit candidate.
It's interesting. And so now, Monica, I know like for the other option we have in there for the exercises around case studies and ABRs, and I know for me, I didn't find doing QBRs that useful. I felt like it was kind of distracting because I felt like they were doing presentation anyway. I learned from that. But you not only have found those to be helpful, but you also do different types of exercises because you have all different kinds of disciplines under your roof. Maybe you can speak to some of that and how do you set up QBRs so that you actually get something from it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like QBR is such a big word when I almost call it like the micro meeting, right? It's really what we're looking for is how do you own a meeting? And it's usually the peer interview stage of the interview process. And how do you own the room? How do you discuss updates? How do you deal with questions on the fly? So it's less about, looking at data and presenting data. It's more about how are you and what's your executive presence in the room? So as Jan mentioned, I oversee customer success, implementation, support, and professional services. And so when we have interviews in those for implementation, it could be an example of your weekly, project tracking meeting, right? How do you run that? How do you talk about what's on track? What's that escalation? What are things that are happening? And we're going through a change management in real estate technology. So our industry, our users are not very tech savvy. And so being able to speak to them in their language, but also marrying what we're doing in our technology to them. You may not have real estate experience, but it's more of that human connection that you can have with an individual. And I think sometimes you can't get that from like a typical lot of data work, but just walk us through how do you present in a meeting. So we've done that for implementation. For CSM, it could be, product updates that are happening, events that we're doing. I just want to see how you're presenting that in some of the questions we ask. So that's where the peers come in and they're able to have that conversation. I also agree. I know I saw a comment like free work. I don't like free work. I've had to do it myself when I've interviewed. They give you a problem that that they're having in the organization and they want us to kind of solve for it. We don't do that. And I agree. I don't like that either.
Yeah. And so maybe I'm going to go into the resources and just kind of show one of this is like the process that you used in the past, Anika, right? But I mean, what kinds of processes have you had, each of you, and how have you changed them over time? You know what I mean? Like what kinds of things have you altered in your hiring processes? And Effie, maybe we'll start with you, even though this isn't yours. You don't have to talk through this one, but you have, you've done it, 6 times, and really ground up. So I figure you've kind of learned some lessons the hard way.
Yeah. I will start off by the way, something that's not written here. If any hiring manager can hire and steal your good team members from previous companies, I would very highly recommend that. That's a sort of like a side note. They know what they're signing up for, you know what they're signing up for, and it really, cuts down this whole process. So I've done that
So
twice.
if you like your boss, stay in touch with them, right?
Yes, absolutely. Stay in touch with them. Even if there's nothing open now, you don't know what's going to happen in a year from now. I highly recommend it. I've brought 2 of my former team members over in my current company at different times. But the process that I've done, I personally, I'm very lucky that I have the budget for recruiters. They sort of do the initial filtering for me. So I don't have to go through hundreds of resumes. They could, do the initial filtering call with some of the candidates. So that really, really helps and cuts down, and make sure that the initial candidates that you do get are of higher and closer quality to what you're looking for. And again, in the intro interview, which I've touched upon, I always ask for open-ended questions. Candidates tend to talk about processes where they are right now. So when you start with, talk to me about a time when you avoids that whole situation of where I'm right now, we have onboarding and then we bring in someone else and that is not really helpful for a hiring manager. I want to know what the candidate specifically did. So all of those examples really, really help of explain to me a time, show me a time, talk to me about a time. And I like to talk about accomplishments that they're especially proud of, because then I really know what makes them exceptional. I tend to also see a lot of times I'll get answered like a customer, was unhappy and I brought the salesperson and the engineer and the support person, and that really doesn't really give me a really good, sense of who they are. And again, the practical interview is really important because it supplements all the sort of theoretical stuff. And just like it was mentioned before, the peer interview is super, super important. I always encourage the interviewer and the interviewee to be very honest and open, because I want the candidate to feel free to know what they're signing up for, and to feel free to answer, to question, have any question before they even start.
So yeah, and certainly, yeah, you're much better off if you're not hiding anything, right? Because otherwise you have mismatched expectations and then they're out the door looking for another role. But Monica, you were nodding your head when Effie was saying, like, talking about some of the things she's trying to avoid in her process, and I was sort of curious what resonated for you and what kinds of things you found that you're trying to correct for or address in your hiring process?
Yeah, so I love the, tell me about a time that because I actually got this feedback very early in my career. I think it was probably my second job. And I was so appreciative of it that somebody said, you talked about everything else, but you never talked about what you specifically did in your role that made that positive impact. And that like stayed with me. And every job interview I went on after that, I was very clear to talk about I did this, I did this. And so when I asked for specifics, I really want to know the detail of the specifics that you
And
did.
why is that? As a hiring manager, from that perspective, why do you need to know that?
I want to know what ownership you took. Ownership, and that shows me what kind of ownership you're taking in a role, whether it's what you're doing every day, how detailed you are, how, tenacious you are, relentless you are. Those are things that are needed in parts of the role. And then also, how is your follow-up? All of those things you can get from what you did and not necessarily what other people did. And you bringing in other people is also a good skill, but how much have you owned yourself before you brought in somebody else? I think that's important. So, we did change that, and actually we had to coach our peer interviewers to do the same, because what I found is when I would kind of try like listen in on some of the peer interviews, I could see that it was very much of a cultural conversation or a behavioral conversation, and we didn't really get down to the details.
Yeah. And so basically what you're each talking about is ways that you're trying to understand who these different candidates are who are coming through, so that you have some way of comparing apples to apples. So you're trying to understand kind of what their contributions are, how are they going to work in a team, work with the customers, things like that, right? And then if you need to know more details, well, like once you get sort of like the STAR or the PAR method, and you get like that 90-second sort of, going through, then if you want more details, you're going to follow up with questions. Is that pretty much how you're going to expect it?
Yeah, typically. It's also a good way to see how succinct and direct a candidate is, because with our clients every day, we know that they don't have a lot of time. So, how direct are you in explaining what you have done, and how succinct are you? And can you get your point across pretty quickly, because you're going to have to do the same with our clients, no matter the role that you're in client experience.
Right. And before we go to Anika, I wanted to just ask you, Monica, so when you got to a situation where someone left after 1 week, tell folks about that and how that impacted how you went through your process.
Yeah, we changed our process after that. So we had hired somebody and they got into the role and it wasn't what they expected. And that was not somebody that had actually gone through any leadership. It was just the hiring manager and I think one other person, and they joined the company. And I think it was on us, right? We were not very transparent on what they're stepping into. Everything is not, flowers and roses and daisies. I think what we did do is change our process to be very transparent, right? Our product is where it's at. This is what we're trying to do. Our engineering team is where it's at. This is what we're trying to do. These are all the goals we have. Some of the data work we have is going to be manual, and we haven't really figured out a way to automate some parts of it. I think those are the things that we are now better at, being more transparent. So when folks do come and join the team, they know that, okay, you know what, we're going to have to roll our sleeves up a little and do some work, as opposed to expecting everything to be automated. And the other thing is we wanted to understand how people like to be onboarded, because frankly, when we were at the startup, we didn't have any kind of formal onboarding. So if somebody's looking for, a lot of training, a lot of shadowing, weeks of something, that's not going to be the right fit. And with that person leaving, they came from a larger organization, and probably they did say they were used to that when I had the post call with them. And And it was a bit haphazard. So we changed our processes and tried to get in the middle. We're not anywhere near perfect.
Right. No, you never can be. It's just always so Anika, I know that you have your process now at a fintech, and I'm really impressed actually by all of you that have processes that end in 3 to 4 weeks. So I know I've been a part of processes that drag on for ages. So that's actually really impressive. But you also have, structures that you've created on your own when you've had, really, well, I guess in many cases you haven't had any support, right? Like it's just been whatever you put together. And then,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah,
and then
that's right.
these scorecards that you came up with, they're actually from the Who book, right? I forget
That's
what
right.
it
Yeah. I
stands
read
for.
that book one before I started building out processes from the get-go, and it was eye-opening. And the main reason I did a lot of these like mapping of what the process would look like internally is I didn't have a recruiter internally or externally helping me. It was basically me, the hiring manager, as well as the recruiter built into one. And because of the number of people that had to get involved to help hire someone, whether it was a peer interview, a panel interview, the CEO, I needed to make it really, really concise and easy for everyone in the organization to know, hey, we're hiring a CSM. These are the key like things to look out for when you are speaking to the CSM. And then what are you scoring them on? Because then we need to look at all the scorecards equally. Now, a lot of people, there's also tools out there, by the way, that do this. There is like, we use a tool now as well, but in general, back in the day, like when you're just starting, it's like a spreadsheet and then like a Google Doc that you're just sharing amongst everyone else. And so a lot of the processes that I've built I've always wanted to keep steps as like 5 steps max, meaning like you really don't need to talk to more than 5 people in an organization to really understand if this person is the right fit. But also, if as a hiring manager, if you do the work of educating your wider business of why are we hiring this role? What KPIs are they responsible for? And then again, what level of depth should you be going on in these interviews? Like, what should you be covering? Like, should you be understanding their previous experience? The situational questions that everyone talked about, super important. But all of this should be really clear to everyone that's speaking. And again, like, hiring is super costly from a company perspective as well as from a
Yeah.
candidate perspective. Like, the number of dollars it takes to just get certain people on calls, like be mindful of everyone's time. That's why we try to keep everything, if diaries align, again, I say if because holidays, people being available, not available is a big issue. But like you should really know in your first 2 calls if this person is going to move forward or not. So our tasks usually come later in the process. And also, like, we eliminate pretty quickly. I know that sounds pretty harsh, but like the first 2 calls are usually with some sort of recruiter or the hiring manager to really understand, like, hey, this is going to be a fit or a no fit. So we're not wasting anyone's time, both on our side as a company, but as a candidate as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really
Yeah.
critical to map out your entire hiring process when you do start. And my biggest learning is the scorecards and making
Yeah.
sure your entire team that's on the hiring squad, as I call them, like understands the scorecard and understands how to fill it out as well. And by the way, my scorecards are based exactly on what is in the job description. I am not trying to hide anything. Like if you are a candidate that's come in prepared based on the job description, you're probably going to score a 10 on my scorecard because what I'm hiring for is clearly on the job description. And if it's not, then there's a mismatch of expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I gotta say, I think the Who method is interesting. Certainly having a scorecard, I think is helpful and informative. I didn't like the focus on tell me about your biggest failure and then going on and digging into failure. I
Yeah,
just
I don't like
like,
that either, to be honest. I focus on
yeah,
successes as well. I think failure, like, or what's your biggest weakness and how do you overcome it? I don't like that type of situational question at
yeah.
all.
Yeah, and I was with a company that was really focused on the whole failure question, and then seeing behind the scenes how they would nitpick it and everything, and I was just like, ugh, that is not what I'm taking from that book. But so I just want to say, like, you know, take what's useful for you. So we're going to go to breakout rooms. If you can think about a hiring or interview process that was informative and transparent, I think that's really helpful to think about kind of what makes a good hiring process. And then also, if you are on the hiring side, then how do you structure your interview hiring process at your company, and how are you thinking of improving it? Those are the two questions that we'll go to for breakouts. And I'll come up with, I think, smaller rooms so we can go out, because we'll just have just about 15, 18 minutes maybe to go out. And let me set those up. So, all right, I'm gonna do 10 rooms. And great. So go ahead and make certain you get the links before you go, if you didn't get the links.
Dang it.
What were you all talking about? And Seth can now join in on the conversation. Will be one breakout room here.
We were talking about the first question being the interview process that was informative and transparent, and then I blatantly said I have not had one before. And then we talked about, Eric had mentioned, you know, getting feedback that was informative and transparent, and how beneficial that was to him and his journey when he was looking for a job at one point. And then we were getting to question 2, which was the improvement, where it was the feedback. So I mentioned I was trying to gather feedback from mock interviews, like taking notes, of course, like what are people experiencing? What are some ways that our hiring managers could help? And a lot of it all came back to providing feedback. So you get to the end, like, why didn't you get the job, or anything that's going to actually be constructive for the next time you go through interviews, because they have direct feedback for that.
Right. Well, and you know, think about it. If your first interaction is with the recruiter, then it's really the recruiter that needs to set you up, right? And then if you get over to the hiring manager, then they can continue to set you up to, you know, for what the process is going to be. But otherwise it can be really, yeah, you're just sort of like wondering, like, okay, and what is next? And what are you trying to figure out? So
Well,
yeah.
I think for us, or at least the part of the gist is, when you don't make it to the final round or whatever stage that you're hoping to, right? Understanding like what was it about either your interview or what you brought to the table specifically, or what the other candidate did that set them apart, and understanding those nuances would be super helpful. And I told Autumn and Kathy, like, when I was at a larger organization, part of the interview panel, we weren't allowed to give any feedback, because legal reasons. And being the person that I am, I'm like, there's a way to toe the line between being legal and still being helpful, right? Like, that's always my thing. And so don't tell this to anybody, but I used to just like have like, okay, well, I can have let's have a coffee talk off campus, or this is Eric being like Eric and not representative like Microsoft. And I would share some information, but not like the full thing, right? And so I would try to do that to help people. But I'd be curious to hear from like the interview panel, since they're all in hiring teams or hiring managers, like, you know, what is it that stops them, right?
Well, I know too, sometimes you try to give feedback to people and you can actually be met with hostility, you know, and so then you kind of get turned off, and you sort of like, right, I was literally just trying to be helpful, and now you want to be argumentative with me. And it's if nothing else, I'm really glad I passed, you know, like,
right.
And then like, I know of another hiring manager who is literally getting harassed. I don't know if you saw the post in Slack, but He's actually
Mm.
getting harassed, right? So like
Good
that can
God.
happen too, where like there's some people out there who I don't know how they, I mean, it's just always too small of a world in my mind, like I don't know why you would harass somebody and think that's going to get you the job. But
Mm.
Seth,
It
if
would never
you've
occur
been
to me.
yeah, right. I know. I don't know. But Seth, now as a director of CS, I imagine you've been in the hiring side as well. You're not always just on the looking side, right? So what
Yeah.
kinds of things have you tried to do in your hiring process?
Well, I just to go back to like the HR person in the beginning, like I've had some experiences where they have laid out like this is what the process looks like. And I really, really appreciate that, but not everyone does do that. So you sometimes don't always have that context. But I've been on interview panels where, the final decision is a democracy and people give a thumbs up. And if there's any wavering people, then that's a no. And that can be hard because then, it might not be you, it might be somebody else that like
Oh, fair enough.
had a problem with it. So then again, like you don't want to speak on behalf of other people. So, delivering that information as the hiring manager can be tricky. But like if you have a good relationship with the candidate and vice versa, then I agree that like you can have an off the record kind of conversation and say, okay, well, this is why. Maybe focusing on what the other person did X and Y. And that's all we
Right.
ultimately have to do.
It's interesting that you mentioned about everybody having sort of the thumbs up, thumbs down. I was at a company once where it had to be that everyone was ecstatically thumbs up or they wouldn't do the hire. And they're like, we're a startup, it's important, every hire is important. If it's not emphatically thumbs up, then we move on. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like you only got to talk to them for a half an hour, and it's like, I don't know. It feels like some we were talking the other day. It's sort of like trying to buy a house when you get to walk into a place for 10 minutes. Like I find it extremely challenging, the hiring process. Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, I was gonna say I used to buy into that whole culture thing, and then as I kind of matured, I realized like, I really only want like a enthusiastic thumbs up from like for my team. But then everyone else, you can have a say, but yours is gonna be like proportionate to like how important you are to my function.
Mm,
But yeah, I over time I really disagreed with that because yeah, at other larger companies, like we would turn down really awesome candidates because like someone in like finance said like no, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go there and like murder them right now.
Yeah, I know. Iron's hard. Effie, you came off mute, so I was thinking you had a thought about it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, really, I know everyone wants a part in an interview process, but really less is more.
Mm,
Get the ones who are really important, because then you have those kind of situations of like someone in
Yeah.
finance is not happy. Because the more people you have, the more opinions, and it's very rare that everyone's going to agree.
Yeah. Although it is, I think, important to have, like we were talking before when we were prepping for the session, just the groups that are going to be working, interacting with your team members.
Right.
Like it's important to have that as part of the peer. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. But I've seen many, when I've seen in the chat, some people are saying I've been in a process for 2 months and I'm on stage 6 and I have to talk to everybody and the janitor. Like that is just a very rookie, unprofessional way of doing it.
Or maybe a large company way. I don't
Even
know.
large company, how many
How many people do you need?
pages do you really need?
Yeah. What other things came up when people were in the breakout room? We have 1 minute left, and we will next Tuesday at we're doing our later time meeting, and it's going to be from the perspective of people who got the job, by the way. So we'll have 3 people who are going to be talking about what they went through to get the job, because it is a different kind of environment right now. But any other closing thoughts today from what you were discussing in your breakout room?
I'll just briefly say in our group, we seem to all appreciate feedback, understanding also that sometimes you have to actually proactively ask for it. So when you receive a statement of, moving forward with another candidate, what's a good way to phrase a compelling and polite question? Understanding that there are some liabilities for human resources team as to the detail they can go to, but how that can be sort of elicited and then obviously acted upon.
Yep. Great. Well, good. I hope that this was informative, insightful, got you thinking about some things, maybe got you thinking about your own hiring process, or if you're part of a hiring process. All of the notes and everything, hopefully we've captured in the breakout notes. We'll keep all of that not only in our Slack channel, which I hope you're all part of, but also they'll be up on our website, and you can find all of our past sessions under the resources, Success Hour resources tab. So have a great holiday. We will see you next Tuesday. We'll be meeting at the 4:30 p.m. time, which is 7:30 Eastern, and middle of the night for anybody who's in EMEA. I'm sorry, OHA.
Thank you, Jan.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.